I just think reminding people that it is a process, just like any transition, it's can sometimes be uncomfortable. Um, but I think at the beginning, a lot of people are just so overwhelmed by the thought of thinking everything needs to change, and everything's going to change and kind of the logistics of things.
Mhm.
But I think as, you go through it and you start to recognize, well, this is what this aspect might look like and how that might look in the future. I think you start to realize, okay, there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Welcome to Divorce Diaries, where attorney Cary Jacobson brings you real stories, hard truths, and practical advice on navigating divorce and family law. Whether you're going through it, considering it, or just curious, this is your place for clarity, confidence, and resilience.
Welcome to Divorce Diaries, Lessons from the Trenches. I'm your host, Cary Jacobson. On this podcast, we explore the challenges of divorce and how to navigate them with the expert advice from professionals who have seen it all. Today, I'm excited to have Kelly Krupinski, a family law attorney with Jacobson Family Law. Kelly is experienced in settlement agreement negotiation, mediation, and collaborative divorce. Kelly is passionate about helping families resolve conflicts amicably, and she's here to share her perspective on how to avoid some of those common mistakes during divorce and to build a better future for everyone involved. So, Kelly, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Can you start just by sharing with our listeners a little bit about your background, both personally and in the law, and how you became interested in family law?
Sure. Well, I started law school kind of not really sure what I wanted to do, and so I got involved with a clinic that was a juvenile clinic.
Mhm.
It was based more on criminal aspects or of the juvenile, but since then I've sort of gone back and forth in my career between juvenile matters and family law, which are of course very similar. So I started with at legal aid, and I did the representing children in foster care there, and then transitioned to their family law unit. So I've sort of gone back and forth between the two and landed here in family law right now.
Awesome. Is there anything that you find most effective for those families who are navigating divorce?
Um, yeah, I definitely think if you're going through it, you want to find someone who's knowledgeable and experienced in family law. It's something that I think some people think, oh, I can just handle this on my own, but it really is nuanced and something that it would be beneficial to have somebody who really is aware of the law and kind of different solutions that might be. It's sometimes really pretty creative in the solutions that you find to help out families try to get through the process of divorce.
Yeah, I think many times I have seen over my career where people just think, going through a divorce, so any attorney can help, right? Um, Very much like the practice of medicine, where you have kind of specialties. Those, you want to have a cardiologist who is working with you if you have a heart problem and not an orthopedist. So you want to have someone who works in family law and not just a general practitioner or someone who handles criminal matters or, personal injury matters, because they are so different and so specific. Um, so I think that that's just something for those listeners out there to be aware of, because many times there is really a specialty and a focus on a particular practice.
I would definitely agree. I think, if anybody had a criminal problem, they probably would not want me around. So I think, having the experience with family law is definitely beneficial. It's something you see, something you do, and not that it's common or that you don't take every case, with the specifics, but it's just definitely something to at least be able to catch some of the issues that might arise.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into the divorce process a little bit more. What are some of those biggest misconceptions that people have when they're starting the process? Is there something that you see regularly?
Yeah, I think when a lot of people kind of are starting out, they think that it has to be kind of court driven, that they
Mhm.
have to, file right away. Like they need to have the court kind of make these decisions on their behalf. And I don't think that that's really necessary. I think that, in fact, it works better the less the court is involved. Yes, the court is needed for actually doing the divorce, but I just think it's not necessary that you have them involved right from the beginning.
Are there any particular reasons why someone would want to file for the divorce first before trying to reach an agreement instead of trying to reach an agreement first and then filing for the divorce?
I mean, I think in cases of like maybe emergencies and things, especially relating to children, that might be something you want the court involved immediately, because you might need that intervention if you don't have a partner or spouse who's able to really work with you, and there might be something that's necessary to get them involved. But generally, I think, and most of the people I see, and it's definitely a case where they might want to try to work it out on their own, not on their own, but might want to work it out between themselves so that they can figure out what works best for their family.
Yeah. Do you find that people are able to negotiate those agreements with less stress than if they are in the court system?
Absolutely. I think, by doing it either through mediation or settlement or however they choose to do it, I think just kind of them in the driver's seat, I think is definitely something where people feel more in control and able to kind of navigate the process. I think when the court's involved, there might be deadlines, other things they're not really sure of, and the next steps they should take. So I always think if it possible, then I think it's always better to try to do it on your own.
Yeah. Can you share with the listeners an example of a case or a situation that could have been prevented if they had had some prior planning, and how our listeners could avoid being in a similar situation?
Um, I think, the big thing that comes up for that is like prenuptials, especially lots of times in second marriages, because um, there might be other things that need to be addressed, such as, other prior families, children, that sort of thing. I did have a case once where someone had remarried and had adult children, and then had in this second marriage without a prenup, then he was kind of trying to deal with some of those issues that maybe he really hadn't been planning on. And so I think it's always a good idea to have somebody kind of look out for those things for you before you might enter into that second marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think, especially those situations where it's a second or subsequent marriage,
Mhm.
a pre or a post-nuptial agreement is invaluable because it addresses things like, well, what assets both people are bringing into the marriage, how they're going to handle the division of assets if something happens in this relationship, but also, especially if you have adult children, right? How, if one party dies, how those children may inherit from from each other. So it is absolutely crucial, in my opinion, to have those pre or post-nuptial agreements in those situations, and really can prevent, you know, those situations where there's fighting or disputes in that second marriage, or even the first marriage, doing that prenuptial agreement the first time. I think it's just one of those taboo subjects people are so worried about bringing up.
Mhm.
But
It's definitely maybe sometimes hard to bring it up, but especially in a second marriage, but like also a first one, it's a good way to kind of lay those issues out on the table. So even if there isn't a divorce that comes up, later, I
yeah,
still think that having that planning and kind of discussions about how you plan to handle finances, handle assets, those sorts of things, it's always beneficial.
yeah. I mean, I can, at least in my experience, finances is one of the main reasons people get divorced, not to mention the communication. But I don't think, many couples do have those conversations about how they're going to handle finances in a relationship. And then, you have couples with differing values when it comes to money, right? You can have someone who is the spender, and you have someone who is the saver, and then that can get really messy when you're going through a divorce, because it's like, well, why should we divide the assets of this, the person who's been saving when the other person was spending? So a prenuptial agreement would address all of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Do you find that, when your clients are dealing with high emotions, how do you help them with those practical solutions when handling the emotional side of the divorce process?
Well, I think definitely addressing the emotional aspects is important, because although there are solutions and practical solutions that you need to reach, I think you can't just ignore that the emotions are really the driving force behind everything. So definitely just kind of acknowledging it, and not to be their therapist, because that's not the role of an attorney, but just to say, look, this is hard. This
Right.
is um, you know, this is something that you have to deal with. And, if there are children involved, and you're trying to still handle everything you need to do for the children while handling everything for the divorce, it's of course very hard to manage those emotions. So I just think addressing it, really just making sure that the client knows that you are aware of this, and it's even if you are an attorney and this is what you deal with all the time, it is still really hard for the person that's dealing with it.
Yeah. Do you ever find situations where you may refer that individual to either a therapist or a divorce coach?
Absolutely, yeah, because if it's something where that person is spending a lot of time just focusing on that, and then it's kind of impairing their ability to get to those practical solutions, then that is certainly where another professional would be helpful.
Yeah. I think sometimes having that outlet of working with a therapist or a coach can be really helpful for people to discuss those emotional aspects,
Mhm.
so that they can make the important decisions related to the divorce.
Yep.
So, for any of our listeners who may be parents, is there any advice that you would give them to ensure that the divorce process minimizes the impact on their kids?
I think, which I think really most of the people kind of do this anyway, but just making sure that your focus is the children.
Yeah.
And generally everybody is like, of course, that is my main goal. But I still think sometimes, even if that is your main goal, to focus on the children, these emotions do come up, and anger comes up about, the other person. So
Mhm.
just trying to maybe focus on the children, and even if you might think something is better, try to consider other possibilities, or try to consider compromises to ensure that the children are kept in the forefront of everything.
Yeah. Are there any particular practical things that you advise clients on as far as how to focus on the kids or to minimize that impact?
I think there are lots of ways for communication between the parents that you can do. And sometimes we'll recommend like an app where they might have everything in there. So there's a record of everything. There's a lot of them out there that do this, that just kind of makes it easier to look back and record text messages. Things can't be erased, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that way it just makes it so everybody's aware of this is kind of how we're going to move forward. And I think that's been helpful for a lot of clients.
Yeah. The one that I think I recommend the most, and I've seen the courts typically recommend the most, is Our Family Wizard. And we can add a link of that in the show notes. But, many of them, there are paid ones and there are free ones. It kind of depends on how, what features you need, but a lot of them will have kind of lots of different pieces in it. I think Our Family Wizard has an expense tracker and a calendar, like a shared calendar, and also, like you mentioned, the communication tool built in. And God forbid if anything happens in the future and you end up back in court, you have access to all of those communications without having to go back to text messages and emails and that sort of
Mhm.
thing. So, yeah. Is there any particular, piece of advice or encouragement that you would like to leave our listeners with who are going through and navigating this divorce process?
I just think reminding people that it is a process, just like any transition, it's can sometimes be uncomfortable. Um, but I think at the beginning, a lot of people are just so overwhelmed by the thought of thinking everything needs to change, and everything's going to change and kind of the logistics of things.
Hmm.
But I think as, you go through it and you start to recognize, well, this is what this aspect might look like and how that might look in the future. I think you start to realize, okay, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And so, just recognizing that it is a transition and it's sometimes bumpy and messy, but
Right.
it does eventually get to the point where you are in a much better place.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Related to that, and recognizing that it is a process and that every situation is somewhat different, but is there a typical timeline that you know see with your clients as to how long that process takes? I know that people often ask, well, how long is this going to take us to handle? So is there something that you typically see as far as what that process looks like?
I think it also depends on kind of what path the client might choose.
Yeah.
So, if they're deciding they want to kind of work on this agreement before filing anything with the court, we usually give about 6 months time to try to really do the negotiation piece, back and forth and getting the agreement completed. And then hopefully, even within that time, have the divorce done
Right.
through the courts. Sometimes that can take a little longer, depending on assets, custody issues, whatever might happen. But generally, 6 months to do the negotiation. If they choose to do mediation, that we usually try to say, maybe 2 to 3 sessions, depending on 2 hour sessions, depending on, again, the same kind of issues. And then that's sort of based on their schedule and when they can kind of fit that in. But if the two of them are working together and able to really communicate, I would say within 6 months, probably that it could be completed.
Yeah. And for all of those listeners out there that, you know, 6 months is nothing when we're talking about the alternative of court world. And here in Maryland, I would say the fastest I have seen a divorce that has gone all the way through court probably is more than a year, just because of scheduling and all of the things that go into that process. I would say 12 to 18 months is probably the most common. So 6 months is relatively short when we're talking about a time frame. We've seen them happen much quicker than that if people are working together. But I would say 6 months is pretty common for our clients.
And I would say also that, if they decide or are unable to do it through themselves without using the court, lots of times the court is going to order them to do what we're trying to accomplish without getting the court involved anyway, such as mediation or those sorts of things. So
Right.
it's, I just think, way more beneficial to try to get this resolved, get many of the issues resolved before filing anything with the court.
Absolutely. Oh, is there any last piece of advice that you would like to share, or share how listeners can learn more about you and what you do at Jacobson Family Law?
Sure, they can go to jacobsonfamilylaw.com. That's our website, and they can schedule a consultation with me, with you, and see the best way that we can help them. I think we also have a lot of great resources on that website with blogs and that might give information that you might have more specific questions about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your experience and advice. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us today on this episode of Divorce Diaries. Remember, every journey is unique, but you don't have to navigate it alone. Visit jacobsonfamilylaw.com or call 443-726-4912 for support and guidance. Are you considering divorce, or are you in the early stages of the process? Attend our free online divorce workshop. Gain insights into the legal and financial aspects of divorce, discover valuable resources, and learn from experienced professionals. Take the next step towards clarity and empowerment. Register now for our next live workshop at jacobsonworkshop.com.